Welcome everybody this evening to the Kitchen and Midtown Coalition. We are sponsoring a candidate forum for Hoylman, Tennessee Senator Danzilo, State Senate. A little bit about first organization, but I want to thank our dispatcher from St. Luke's this evening. We believe we're going to have much better sound and video than we had in our assembly. Neighborhood Coalition is made up of an organization of many constituent organizations. Our members are the 29th Street Neighborhood Association, West 36th Street Block Association, West 43rd Street Block Association, West 44th Street Better Block Association, HK 45, 46 PA, West 46, 47 Street Block Association, the HK 49, 54th Street Block Alliance, the West 55th Street Block Association, and organizations, including Housing Development Company, Alliance, Party Apps, Hudson Yards, Hell's Kitchen Alliance, that's the bid, that's the yards, and Plaza Tenants Association, Park on Building Community Affairs, a number of condo co-op associations. Sorry, there's a problem there. And a number of individual commercial tenants and owners in our district. I am joined by
Travis Rogers, 10-year Hell's Kitchen West.
Professionally, we span a range of interests. I am executive director of Clinton Housing Development Company, develop affordable housing in the district. Travis is.
I'm an attorney and a DEI professional. I work for a nonprofit here based in New York that's designed to provide human services to students in high risk and high needs across all 5 boroughs.
The Health Kitchen Neighborhood Coalition came together in October 2020 as a response to the difficult public safety issues that were created by the city's poorly managed siting of homeless COVID hotels in our district. In a period of over 5 weeks, we had 2,000 hotel rooms that were completely not managed and also not properly supported for social services in our district. That created huge public safety problems. We have held together as a coalition. Our focus mainly is public safety and the management of social services in our district. So thank you both. Thank you for coming tonight to see this forum. And our goal is, it's not a debate, it's a forum. We ask them questions of the candidates, ask them to respond, talk about it, talk about the issues. And I want to welcome 2 candidates. Our incumbent state senator, Brad Hoylman, and Maria Danzilo. We asked you first to start out with just a quick introduction. And I'll go to you, Brad, first.
Thank you so much, Joe and Travis and Pastor. Thank you for this space and all the technical crew that is putting this into the virtual world for all of us to see. I'm honored over the last 9 years to represent the 27th Senate District here in Manhattan. The districts have changed due to a court decision. The 27th is now being morphed into what's called the 47th. By the way, the 47th used to be in Rome, New York, and now it's in Manhattan, go figure. And it's going to run from Christopher Street, the home of the historic Stonewall, and all the way to 103rd, exclusively on the west side of Manhattan. I've been honored to represent a good chunk of this for the last 9 years. And it's been not just the honor of a lifetime, but extremely challenging, but also I'd say extremely satisfying to work in conjunction with our local elected officials, including Jerry Nadler, Dick Godfrey, Councilmember Botcher, Borough President Mark Levine, and Council members Gail Brewer, and some of the member of Rosenthal who all endorsed me. But we have done great things. And Joe, I want to thank you from the outset. Just last week, we were at the Port Authority bus terminal, where it was announced that the architects had been selected for the Mid-Port Authority bus terminal. That's due to the work here in Hell's Kitchen, Joe and others, Community Board 4, who made sure that when the Port Authority bus terminal was going to be redeveloped, it would be developed only on Port Authority property, and it's going to conclude for the first time an intercity bus terminal. That took a lot of work, and I think that's representative of how communities can work together to get things done with their elected officials at every level of government. I passed over 100 bills in the Senate, ranging from victims' rights. I passed legislation that someone Rosenthal called the Child Victims Act. So far, it's allowed over 5,000 survivors of child sexual abuse to file retroactive claims against their abusers or the institutions that may have protected them. As chair of the Judiciary Committee, I also passed legislation called the Adult Survivors Act, and we're extending that opportunity for folks who are over 18 for 1 year to file retroactive claims. There was a story that in the Times just the other day of a young woman who's filed that exact claim against Harvey Weinstein. I've been proud to fight for tenants' rights here in Hell's Kitchen and across the 5 boroughs. We passed the most consequential tenant legislation in the history of the state of New York, protecting tenants from deregulation, from being evicted from their homes. The legislation I drafted called the Tenant Safe Harbor Act did exactly that for tenants during the COVID pandemic. I've also been working hard in the area of public health. I call myself a vaccine warrior because I've taken on the anti-vax movement. The legislation that I passed in 2019, when we had a measles outbreak, is going to be so useful as we deal with public health crises and kids who are unvaccinated, whether it's measles, whether it's COVID-19, and now polio. Believe it or not, there is a very conservative group of parents who don't believe in the science and would, I guess, throw caution to the wind and not vaccinate their kids. That's not me. I'm going to work with teachers and administration, schools, and make sure that our kids are protected. I'm the father of a 4-year-old and an 11-year-old, so public education is very front of mind. My daughter's dyslexic is something actually Ray and I have discussed. My 11-year-old wasn't diagnosed with her dyslexia until she was in 4th grade. That's far too long. That's where I take an issue that's personal and put it into policy. We passed legislation that I authored that will establish a dyslexia task force across the state of New York to set standards in screening for kids so they can get identified early and get the intervention they need. And I know part of our focus here is of course about public safety, as it should be, with the rising rates of crime. The worst we've seen since I've lived in New York City for close to 30 years. And something's got to be done about it. And that's why I've been working hard in the Senate. I passed legislation that would provide the federal waiver, what's called the Institute of Mental Diseases. That is this bureaucratic logjam that prevents hospitals that have more than 16 beds to provide long-term psychiatric care to patients. And that's exactly what happened in the case of Michelle Go, who not far from here was pushed to her death by an assailant, and the story then involved that Joe, that her assailant had been in and out of psychiatric hospitals because the hospitals weren't getting reimbursed by the feds. We need to change that, and I passed that legislation in the Senate. And then finally on guns, we see gun crimes rise across our city. I passed legislation to ban ghost guns and also to implement microstamping technology, which is a new technology that's going to allow law enforcement to track the shell casing of a spent weapon to the actual weapon at the scene of the crime. Less than 50% of homicides are solved in this city. We need to increase that and give law enforcement the tools they need. So look forward to talking to you tonight about this and other issues. And just want to thank my colleague here and wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
That was perfectly timed for 5 minutes.
I was given one reminder, speaking to the mic, so hold the mic closer to your mouth, I guess that's all.
Yes, and we have gotten a few texts saying that the sound is not so good, so be aware of that. Maria, your comments.
Hello, how is my sound?
Not good,
Not good. Better?
a little better, but,
Try to project.
yes. thank
So
you.
my name is Maria Danzilo. I want to thank the Hell's Kitchen Coalition, Jillian Travis, and Pastor. Thank you, Brad, for attending this evening. Thank you to the people who are working here at campus. And I want to make a big shout out to my team of hardworking volunteers and all of the interns who are watching this evening. They're a great group of people who've really been working hard the last couple of months. So a big shout out to them. Thank you all to the community leaders who are here tonight as well for the hard work that you've been doing, protecting your community and standing up for your community, because that's what we do. So I'm a lawyer. I'm a mother of 3 children. I grew up in Midwood, Brooklyn, and I'm the daughter of small business owners. My family, my father was in the restaurant business, and my grandparents and uncles all had businesses in District 47 and other places around New York City. So I'm very familiar with the challenges of small business owners, the challenges of New Yorkers trying to make it work here and trying to make ends meet. I've been working since I'm about 14 years old. I put myself through Brooklyn College, Brooklyn Law School, and then I got a fellowship for NYS Law School. I was very happy to study trade regulation and then embarked on a career as an intellectual property lawyer. I worked 35 years for a technology publishing company that was challenged by the big tech transformation that occurred, and I was a legal director of the education group, and I was used to being for those many years that I was in the private sector, the only woman in the room. So I'm used to standing up for women. I'm used to negotiating. I'm used to being strong, and I am excited to have the opportunity to represent this storied District 47, these iconic neighborhoods, and wonderful, wonderful people and neighbors. I'm a mother of 3 children. My husband and I have lived in the west side of Manhattan for 42 years. My husband is also from Midwood, Brooklyn. He grew up a few blocks away from me. However, we met when we were both working near each other. He is a professor at Columbia and also a lawyer. My 3 children are now working. 2 are in college and 1 moved to Seattle, and my 24-year-old moved to Seattle because she felt that it was very hard to make it work here in New York. And it was a great sadness to me that she decided to move across the country, but there were real issues with affordability and job growth and feeling like she had better opportunities in Seattle, Washington. So that is something that really inspired me to step up for all of the young people in our city who really want opportunities here. So I'm also, I'm a lifetime trustee of the Copyright Society of the USA. I was president of that organization, probably one of the youngest or the youngest person in their history, and I think the second woman to hold that position. Last year, I ran for New York City Council, District 6. I came in second out of 6 people. I ran on a pro-public safety platform. Our neighborhood has been experiencing, all of District 47 has been experiencing an unprecedented rise in crime. We, as our community group, got very involved in our community group around 4 years ago over various issues in the neighborhood, and decided to run for city council last year and had a great group of community activists and others supporting my campaign. During COVID, I worked pro bono for a number of small businesses throughout the community who needed to access PPE money. I was very happy to do that. I know that the small business community has really suffered in New York throughout.
1 minute.
1 minute. This time flies. Blah, blah, blah. I also just want to mention that I'm the author of 3 recent op-eds, and I just want to get that in there because time is going to be short tonight, and you could really learn a lot about my position on these issues by just reading those 3, which published in the last couple of weeks. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So our next section, we have 5 questions. We're going to ask you the same questions, respond to the same questions, 3 minutes each. The areas are public safety, social services, and affordable housing. Joe, microphone. We have 5 questions. They'll have 3 minutes each to answer. The areas are social services, affordable housing, and public safety. We're going to start with public safety. Starting out with Maria first. Midtown South Precinct 14 has the highest crime rate, felonies, violent assaults in all 5 boroughs, followed by Midtown West. The vast majority of this crime is not committed by neighborhood residents. Much of the crime is directly and indirectly related to significant narcotics activity in the area. What are your plans and policies to address this dramatic increase in narcotic sales, street use, and resulting violent crime?
Okay, so in order to have a safe city, we have to have rules, and we have to have people who are willing to make sure those rules are enforced. And one of the, you said that we're talking about public safety, but also services. And I think public safety services, mental illness, drug addiction are a complicated web of issues that we really need to look at kind of together. And so for a safe city, we need to have good rules, and one of the things we need to do is make sure that we're addressing the influx of people into the city with drug addiction and drug problems. I know that San Francisco, for example, has had a huge problem with open air drug use. I do not believe that we should have, for example, safe injection sites. I do believe that people who have drug addiction, many of them have underlying mental illness issues that need to get addressed. They need treatment options, and we need to make sure that we're providing those options to them. But I do not believe that enabling drug use is a way to address the safety that people who are using drugs out in public is something that enabling that use is going to make it go away. I do think that we have talked a lot in our community group about the number of marijuana stores that have opened in the community. We've also talked about the fact that a lot of the facilities that have opened in residential neighborhoods attract drug dealers because that's where the drug users go. So these are the kinds of issues that we need to look at and take apart and address by making sure that we're enforcing safety rules around those facilities. If we're going to have facilities, we cannot have drug dealers dealing drugs to people there. And we have to make sure that in terms of services, we are investing in recovery options for people. We need to get them into recovery. We can't just look the other way and say it's okay, you're living your life, we don't want to enable drug use. We don't want to be enabling drug use. Crime control is good community policy, and drug use does bring about a lot of crime. People who are using drugs are often shoplifting, they're engaging in other small forms of crime, and we need to make sure that we're enforcing the laws in our community because that makes for a safe city. Enforcing laws is important. I think that our services are not going to work if our communities are not safe. So we have to, on the basic level, make sure that we do have rules, that we are enforcing the rules, because if the community is not safe, no amount of services are going to work. Thanks.
Brad?
Thank you, Joe. And certainly, I would agree that addiction is a deep-seated societal problem. It is more often than not something that begins long before the person with the addiction, shows up in our neighborhood. So we certainly need to approach it from a multifaceted manner. I would say this though, we have in our neighborhood, when the last addiction crisis ran rampant through Midtown, a problem-solving court called Midtown Community Court. Problem-solving courts do exactly what we're discussing here tonight, which is intervention, diversion, social services, whether it's for addiction, homelessness, mental health, and guns. They intervene. I was at a rally that I helped lead with my colleagues a week or so ago, and I met a lawyer who was walking in with his client, and he said, "This is the only court where my client will leave better than they arrived because of the wonderful services provided at Midtown Community Court." It is a travesty that it's only open 1 day a week. It needs to be open 5 days a week for the entire day because many cases are not being arraigned at Midtown Community Court, and as a consequence, those individuals are left to fend for themselves. They're going to be back on the streets with no services, no support, and no conditions for their release. So Midtown Community Court is both carrot and stick, and that's why it's data proven to work. And we need to continue to work with our local precincts. Hell's Kitchen does a great job in that kind of connection, but we need that all throughout the 47th district. Neighbors are the eyes and ears of our local communities. Those types of relationships are so important, but we also need enforcement. When a cop sees someone illegally using drugs, well, there's a law against that. I don't enforce the laws, I write them. We need greater enforcement to make sure that, frankly, at the end of the day, both our streets are safer and that individuals who are struggling get the help they need. But number one on my list, reopen Midtown Community Court.
So to follow to this, I think we have an increase in reported crime. And I think that's one of the things that's most shocking here. Midtown South, for the same period from 2018 to 2022, reported crime has gone up from 3,707 crimes to 4,073 crimes. We've prepared a chart that you'd like to take back to your campaigns, talk about this. Is in almost every precinct, crime has gone up dramatically. The Midtown South is the one that truly sticks out here. And again, I want to note this is not data on arrests, this is data on reported crime. We are, as a neighborhood, experiencing a different kind of pandemic. I again note reported crime. We are continually told by neighborhood residents they don't report things because it just nothing's going to happen, or it's just too small. On my way here to this forum, I saw a man on 10th Avenue, 45th and 46th Streets, passed out in the entryway of the building, and he had no pants on, and he was sitting there. So that means that folks are coming home from their job or from school, and they have to contend with this. I think we all agree with Brad that Midtown Community Court is a really important thing because it makes a difference. Question I have for you though is, there are people who are resistant to even that kind of help. What do we do? How do we manage this? Going to Maria first and then Brad, or just 1 minute each for a follow-up question.
So I think the increase in crime is on all of our doorsteps. There were 2 sexual assaults recently in my neighborhood, right a block away. And it was an hour before my daughter, who is works in with disabled adults and has a 7 a.m. shift. It was an hour before she was about to get on the subway. And I've been deeply, deeply moved and disturbed by the incredible and heartbreaking stories. The taxi cab driver in Rockaway who was chasing down four people and was brutally murdered and left 4 children. I mean, we can go on and on and on, but in my 1 minute to answer that question, we've got to get to the causes, and I hope we'll have time this evening to talk about some of the things like looking at the current laws that we need to change, like bail reform and other laws to really get at this problem. Thank you.
Yeah, it's unacceptable, and we've seen it, of course, here in this neighborhood. We've seen it across the city, we've seen it across the state, we've seen it across the country. That doesn't make it any better for anyone here, but we are dealing with the tail end of a pandemic and some really deep-seated societal problems and disinvestment from the services that folks need to stay out, to stay healthy, and to get treatment. No doubt that's part of it, but enforcement has to be the other side of the coin. And I think it's unacceptable for the NYPD to walk by and see someone shooting up drugs and not take action. And that's what, unfortunately, I've seen too many times, whether it's Washington Square Park or the west side of Manhattan. That said, I want to be cooperative with our local law enforcement. I want to support them. I have done so. I met with Midtown South just the other day. We're talking about new technology that they can actually use, as well as a new air conditioner, which they desperately need.
Remember, Travis.
Thank you, Jeff. Much of the discussion around public safety is currently focused on gun control, mental health, and hate crimes, all important issues. But little is said about what will be done to proactively protect our community on a day-to-day basis. Residents and businesses of the district feel it's vital to establish an ongoing positive working relationship with our local precincts. Taking this conversation to the street level, what specific steps will you take to ensure our safety in the short term and the long term? Particularly, what further modifications to bail reform do you envision that promote equity and public safety? Starting with Brad.
Well, I think that guns are both short and long term as a problem. We've seen gun violence rise in the city and again across the state and across the country, and it's very disconcerting. It's really scary for a lot of folks because they're afraid to ride what is New York City's superpower, the MTA. So we certainly need to address crime on the spot, but when it comes to guns, it is a feature of longer term planning and shorter term goals. Shorter term, I passed legislation with Assemblywoman Linda Rosenthal to ban ghost guns. We've seen a rise in ghost guns. The gun safety group, every town has declared ghost guns the #1 public safety problem in America right now. New York was one of the first states to ban them. I'm proud to have written that legislation. It also requires longer term planning as well, as I argue, Travis. And that's why, again, Assemblywoman Rosenthal passed legislation that will create a new system of microstamping technology. Every new handgun that is sold in the state of New York, once we have this up and running, is going to require microstamping technology so law enforcement can track these shell casings at crime scenes to illegal guns. And then finally, of course, mental health is a problem. We, contrary to what some might say, we addressed issues in this past budget to both fix the problem with recidivists in our bail laws, to strengthen Kendra's law. We both extended it and made it easier to operate. And we've also taken steps to ensure that dangerous crimes are bail eligible and that recidivists are in fact eligible for bail. So we'll look at the data, we'll follow the facts. The hyperbole around bail, I think, is just that. But I'm always here to listen and open to the community as we deal with these problems that sadly have an origin in so many places. But I will remember this. The young man, Khalif Browder, age 16, arrested for stealing a backpack. The charges were dropped. He was in Rikers for 3 years without any trial and died shortly after his release due to suicide. That's the civil rights component of our bail laws. And here we are in a place of worship, and I just it chills me to think that that we'd ever go back to the days when you would be held without a trial for years, especially if you're a young person like Khalif was.
So let's start with bail reform. I don't think anyone is advocating that we go back to the days when somebody is arrested for stealing a backpack and it's going to be microsound in solitary confinement. But I think that people who are looking at law, including our mayor, even Jerry Carolyn Maloney, even our own district attorney, Ellen Bragg, recently said that we need to add a dangerous standard. But they haven't already
the state. So let's talk about dangerousness, what that means. So currently, our law, New York law, is the only one in the country that doesn't have a dangerousness standard. And some have said that, you know, judges, we use our judges to decide if somebody's mentally incompetent, for example. Federal law has a dangerousness standard. We have a dangerousness standard to decide whether somebody can hold a gun, carry a gun. So we have plenty of ways to add a dangerousness standard that are going to ensure that the individual rights of people are adequately protected. But we need to give judges the power to decide if somebody is a danger to society and needs to be held. We have people with, you know, serious recidivism problems. In Seattle, Washington, they learned that I think it's 112 people were responsible for 2,400 crimes. So I've talked to people in the district attorney's office, and by the way, the district attorney's office itself is complaining about the fact that in deciding dangerousness, judges, if the case is closed, the judge cannot look at that. If the case is open, the judge can look at it. So let's say somebody has 30 priors, all of which are closed. Judge can't look at that. Judge can't use that to decide if the person is dangerous. So dangerousness is something we really need to add. And I think everybody's pretty much been on that at this point, except for, with all due respect, Senator, except for certain people in the New York State legislature who are really holding on to the belief that they don't want to make those changes. I do want to talk about guns as well. So while I'm a big supporter of all the anti-gun laws, we haven't done enough. And there's been a lot of time to do more. And I want to talk about handguns in particular. We have a big problem with handguns in the city. I think the laws that the legislature passed did not go far enough to regulate the proliferation of illegal handguns in the city. We have 2 million illegal guns floating around our city, and we're doing nothing to make sure that the police are enforcing the laws to make sure that those guns are being confiscated. So we need to do much more.
Senator Hoylman, I saw that you wanted to respond. We're really trying to fix this thing.
Yes.
No, before you respond, I really want to know the crux of that question was that what further modifications you made to the form. So we wanted to respond to Maria, also address that portion of the question.
You know, we should be guided by data, by facts. We're talking about people's civil liberties as well as their right to a trial. Jury. These are fundamental due process questions. Chair of the Judiciary Committee, I take this very seriously. But of course, we'll always look at what the information shows. I would argue, and I'm with Senator Hochul, not candidate Lisa on this issue, that judges have discretion now. That's what we put back as engaged them in this last round of bail changes. They have discretion. They can remand an individual that harmed, you know, personal property or someone else. They have full ability to do that. For whatever reason, the district attorneys and the judges are not following the law. I don't think that you can go back to law school, but we have given bail eligible. So this is a real, confounding situation where judges throw up their hands, say they can't do anything, and district attorneys apparently are not seeking bail. So that needs to change. And I think if you look at our Hochul's comments recently, she agrees. But here's the truth: do we need to make changes down the road if there's evidence that we should do so? Absolutely. I'm not closed to any specific notions about changing the bail law to make sure that our community not only is safer but feels safer. Because a lot of this It's about confidence, it's economy, about riding the subway, about feeling you can go home and not have to step over someone who sadly is out cold on your doorstep. And that's my commitment.
The system, irrespective of the current staff, is not working today. The DAs and or the judges have an atmosphere that they're working in. They will not do, even with the law may say, but I will say again, that I agree back to the legislature to note that in fact, we're not acting for the right reason, that people's civil rights are represented. Was the data. Remember, as we gave you this information about crimes, we know arrests are less, but a good.
Yeah, but you also have to understand that we have seen a crime wave across this nation. So to attribute bail, these laws in Albany, to that crime wave, in Minneapolis, Tampa, Daytona Beach, Miami, Los Angeles, Chicago, Spokane, Washington, the crime is surging nationwide. That said, we have to be nimble in our legislature. And I think I've got a record of over 100 bills where if I see a problem, like these noisy choppers we hear right now, I can write a bill to get rid of them. And that's exactly what I've done when it comes to choppers. That's what I've done with gun safety. That's what I've done with housing. You have to be nimble, you have to listen to your constituents, and you have to follow the data. All are very important.
We're going to move on to social services, but I want to note again that in Midtown South, a statistic which is very important. In 2018, we had 400 officers. Today, we have 200 officers. However, the crimes have gone up 1,300. Those officers are actually making more arrests because there's less of them. There's more crime, there's more arrests. It's shocking. So we have to look at every part of the system and not foreclose one to the other. The other part I want to note is you've got to stop pointing fingers at everybody else. It's all of us working together to figure this out. So please stick with us. And Maria, you the last word on this.
Thank you. I just want to say something about the issue of perception. So I read an article just yesterday. NPR was saying that crime is not really real, that it's a perception. And that what New York needs to do is stop having people fear monger. And if we just stop talking about it, maybe it will go away. And
I agree.
That's what they said.
So I think when the answer to crime in New York is that this is a national problem, it's kind of the same thing for me. It's kind of like, if it's a problem, it's a problem. It's a local problem, it's a regional problem, and it may also be a national problem. But we have a local problem here, and it is highly insulting to hear any elected leader ever say that crime is not real. And I'm not talking that, but I truly believe that.
Other times you may, not right.
It's real.
I'm kind of polite about it, but crime is real, and I think that we need to accept that, and we need our leaders to accept that, because we can't fix it if we don't all get on the same page. And to your point, that we're one community, we're all in this together. And if we're all pointing the fingers and saying it's perception and it's not real, because let's face it, the people who wrote the laws that got us into this mess, and I believe a lot of those laws is what led to this mess, are the ones who are also saying crime is not real, because they're wedded to the idea that what they did was the right thing. And for them to see this crime wave and know that part of the problem here is bad laws that got us into this mess, they're gonna go down fighting on that point, that it's not the law that did this, it's other things. It's national crime, it's COVID, blah, blah, blah. So yes, COVID and mental illness have a lot to do with this, but let's face it, we've got
a series of laws that have starting in 2010. We started going down this path when crime rates were low. And each year, more and more laws were passed. In the last couple of years, we really amped that up. And we have we're working on a chart which shows very clearly the rise in crime rates and the rise of legislation that's decarceration is another big thing. And California, just yesterday, 5 counties in California said they're reversing course on decarceration because of the spiraling crime that's occurring in California. They're reversing course on that. So yes, we can talk about decarceration. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of good reasons why we need to do more to make our prison community safe and functional. But we need to talk about that all of these things are contributing to the incredible spike in crime that's causing the loss of human life in our
We're
city.
going to go to social services. Remember that we do not live anywhere but in Hell's Kitchen here, and that's why we're asking you to focus on us locally.
Teed it up perfect. Community Board 4, Hell's Kitchen, Midtown. So, this area. Has one of the highest concentrations of social services facilities, harm reduction centers, and homeless housing in the city, in addition to dozens of hotels that house temporary homeless. Recently, the city has, over the past 2 months, has announced 4 new shelters totaling 558 beds in this area. The 4 new shelters include the Travel Inn, Homes for Homeless has 81 beds, the Skyline Hotel, and the West Ave Hotel. Would you as a candidate support any further new shelters at this time? Please take a look at that, see concentration of the hotels, they're closely located between each other. And I will say that as a resident of the city, we've been inundated by this. So I'll speak to Maria. Speak this.
Okay, so, no, I would not support the citing of more shelters in Hell's Kitchen. I did look at the data, I did look at the number of shelters, and I was astonished at the number of shelters that are concentrated in a small area. There is a fair share doctrine, and there is also a state law, which basically says that the citing of any shelters requires community input. And I've been researching this, and I'm not seeing that there's any compliance with the state law that requires community review before a shelter is cited. At the same time, we're spending $122,000 a year per homeless person in New York City. And one of the op-eds I wrote is about why are we spending so much money and getting so little in return? Why do we still have people living on the street, sleeping on the street, eating out garbage cans? I've talked to homeless people, I've spent time really trying to figure out what's going on, and I hear this over and over again. The shelters are not safe, the services are not good. I'm not getting help that I need. So one of the things we absolutely must do is we really need to demand from our leadership and from the state, and if you elect me, I will do this, demand oversight of our homeless services system, which is billions and billions of dollars a year. And let me also say that we are spending $750 billion on services. Now, I'm a taxpayer. I would like to know where that money is going. And I think all of us would like to know, why are we getting so little and spending so much? I think we need to raise the bar on accountability. We need to understand that these service providers really, people need help. People who are experiencing homelessness deserve a place to sleep. They deserve a safe place. They deserve services that are going to work and get them into permanent housing. And we are failing at that as a city, as a community, as a neighborhood, as a city. So I start my conversation about homelessness with one word, and that's accountability. I want us to demand accountability from our leaders who are very quick to spend a humongous amount of money and not getting anything in return. As a human being, I can't live with myself if I don't stand up for this principle, because every single person has the right to have a functional life and to be housed. And if we're looking the other way and allowing these service providers to continue to fail to do their jobs because we're not holding them accountable, by the way, we have a lot of reasons why we're not holding them accountable. One is that we have a controller who has a deep conflict of interest in terms of he's not doing his job in holding the service providers accountable. There's audits that are not being done, this should be done. Our previous controller started an audit, didn't finish it, found all kinds of problems. And I think we need to hold our leaders on their feet to the fire.
So,
One quick thing, we do a quick sound check, getting text saying that we're in and out of sound.
check that.
Brad, just a second.
Sound check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Maria,
Sound check. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes, it's a complicated question for sure. And I know that the HK community has had its overabundance of shelters. And I was a co-sponsor of that law in 2019 to require a hearing and a community board notice. And I know that Community Board 4 has welcomed shelters into its neighborhood. So that's the qualification, Travis. Only if Community Board 4 works with DHS in support of a shelter do I think that elected officials should be supporting it. And Community Board 4 and Hell's Kitchen in particular has been extremely welcoming. We have obviously a new crisis on our hands with the asylum seekers, but I've heard from Community Board 4 members that they want to welcome these families with young children, pregnant women. I believe that there is a Nobel Prize winner among those busloads of Colombians and others who are coming to our city from Texas and as some sort of horrific political pantomime by the governor of Texas. But the homeless crisis is spiraling out of control. Our previous mayor, in my opinion, did little to nothing. Again, when it came to notice, we're working with community boards in citing these emergency shelters. There are over 50,000 homeless people in New York. 16,000 of them are children. So we have a real moral responsibility, but we have to do it in conjunction with our local community boards, our block associations, and our leaders. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And certainly I don't know anything about the controller. I think he's an upstanding public servant. I have seen on social media some talk about that, but I'm not familiar, so I can't answer any accusations of conflicts of interest. Only to say that I think that the controller is a great public servant.
So I have a follow-up to that question. Senator Hoylman, you did touch upon the fact that we have historically been a very welcoming community here. However, residents of this community have pointed out there's a lack of fair share happening with some districts not being inundated with temporary shelters and others like ours being overrun. And so I have two questions for you. One, what have you learned in recent years with the siting of temporary shelters, and what would you do differently moving forward? Secondarily, do you support the concept of fair share distribution in New York City? And how do you define fair share? That's for both of you. We'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, I absolutely support fair share. I'll tell you this, that Community Board 8 has only one shelter on the Upper East Side. So 8 of 59 community boards across the city have no homeless shelters. That's not fair share. So every neighborhood has to do its part, including places in Lower Manhattan like Soho and Greenwich Village. By the way, my local Community Board 2, actually voted in support of a new shelter for the first time, which shows you that notice and hearings and community involvement can actually work hand in hand to help create opportunities for folks. But you know what's missing, Travis, is these are temporary shelters. We need permanent housing. So we have to connect DHS to HPD. That's not happening. These folks are moving into temporary shelters with no future possibility of permanent housing. We need a scorecard on how many homeless folks are actually getting permanent housing. I am proud to have led the effort during the discussions around this development of Penn Station to develop at least 1,000 units of affordable housing in that neighborhood. That could not be more important. Governor Kathy Hochul has a plan for a Mitchell-Lama for the 21st century that she announced in her housing plan in her state address. She needs to put that plan into action in and around Penn Station so we can start housing folks who do not have homes. It's not just about shelters. We got to focus on permanent housing.
Thank you.
I do support the concept of fair share. I did a bit of reading about the origins of fair share, and the city and the state have very vague about what fair share means and how it works. And one of the things we need to do is really look at how to get a fair share program that is truly a fair share, because right now it is not. And there's a lot of resistance to fair share. There are a lot of communities that don't want to do their fair share. So I do fully support the concept of fair share. But I'm going to go back to accountability again, because I think, especially, I'm a big fan of term limits, and I really believe that our leadership, we need to have people coming in with different perspectives from the private sector and elsewhere to put a fresh look on things. And I think we've fallen into a bit of a pattern with how we're spending money here in New York and elsewhere. San Francisco has the same problem, Los Angeles as well. And that is, there's not a great incentive to move people out of shelter systems into permanent housing. And I think one of the things we need to look at is how to make these temporary shelters really be functional, workable, safe, clean, organized. And I agree that we need to have more housing for people who are experiencing homelessness and can't afford to live. We do need to build more. We do need more housing. We do need to make that part of the whole picture. But at the same time, we need to house people sometimes temporarily, and those shelters need to be working, and they're not. We can't, $122,000 per year, it's not working. So we need to be honest about that and try to fix it.
So on the issue of shelters and fair share, to close, it should be noted the 4 shelters we mentioned, the people, community board 4 received 1 day's notice for these 4 shelters for 558. Up top of the roughly 2,000 supportive housing shelter beds we have. So that doesn't seem to be like a fair share. It seems like better to keep it quiet as opposed to saying we need to work with you or the candidates to make sure, or we're elected, that there's accountability on that toward the city, because there are specific laws about notice. And as Brad has noted, the more you work with the community, the better the outcome is. And therefore, this community has pretty much had it. I must be honest with you. We move on to supportive and affordable housing. And we know that supportive housing is one answer to the homeless crisis. There is no question about it. However, it is not the solution for everyone. Many homeless individuals are struggling with severe drug addiction or persistent and chronic mental illness living on the street. How can these individuals be helped? Because in supportive housing, you must be able to live independently with support. And there's a cohort of people that I have seen in the past 5 years that requires much more assistance, starting with Maria.
So there are 2 programs that I've looked at that seem to be having some really good results to that particular question. And one of them is a program in Los Angeles where there's a big problem with the prison to homeless shelter, and often people are mentally ill. So it's prison to homeless shelter and they're mentally ill and they're not getting services. It's a very successful program where housing is dependent on the person accepting services and complying with taking their medication, for example, that housing is dependent on that. And the program, they interviewed mothers whose children were homeless for years and were in and out of prisons. And deep mental illness, and the program is having great success. So that's something I'd love for New York to look at. And then the second program, then Michael Schellenberger, ran for governor in California last year, wrote a book on this particular issue. And he talks a lot about Portugal and European solutions to the problem as well, specifically around mental illness and drug addiction, people who are mentally ill and have a drug addiction because they're self-medicating. And what do you do with people who are really sick and need help? And putting them into an apartment is not going to make the problem go away. They need much more comprehensive oversight and help. And I think we as a society need to do that. We need to commit to doing that. Even if it, and housing should be doing. So we can find solutions, but I'm very committed to those kinds of solutions that are creative and out of the box and are really going to address the problem and not push the can down the road.
Brad?
Yeah, I mean, Joe, you're the housing expert, so I most certainly, as a public official, try to defer to the experts here in New York City, not in although there are models in other parts of the world. New York City is an exceptional place, and we have a lot of efforts that have worked here in New York, like great homeless providers like Breaking Ground in Times Square, which is doing a fantastic job by most accounts. We need to look to those experts. I'll say that as again part of the Penn Station redevelopment, we're going to have 200 units of supported housing there. Another thing that I fought for, as well as a drop-in center in Penn Station itself, which is so important to have those services in the station, rather blocks away in our community, but where folks who are homeless and mentally ill and have addiction, where they go, which is in the subway itself. Subway is really concerning. Ridership is down 30%, but crime is at the same level as in 2019. So if we don't get homelessness, addiction, psychiatric help in the subways themselves, New York, again, is going to lose that enormous competitive advantage, which is the DMTA. So I just want to mention that again. Albany's oversight of the city's DHS program does need to be more muscular, I agree. I don't serve on any of those committees, but I'll tell you that private homeless providers, take advantage of the system. Their executives are paid millions of dollars. They have nonprofit arms that run the shelters, but meanwhile they're laughing all the way to the bank. So I'm looking at legislation to cap executive pay for homeless providers because they shouldn't be making that much money and the public's getting ripped off.
So as a follow-up to this, should mentally ill individuals and substance abusers be involuntarily removed from the streets and providing immediate care? How do you do this? This is a very difficult subject. When someone is 100% resistant to treatment or help, what do we do as New Yorkers to balance the need for public safety and caring? Sorry.
Well, that's in part Kendra's law, which New York was a leader in passing that legislation. We've made it more comprehensive by, first of all, we extended it for 5 years. We allowed mental health practitioners a little easier to testify. They can now testify by video. We've expanded care coordination between the different agencies. And we've allowed mental health reassessments within 6 months of the expiration of an outpatient treatment order. But often it is a judgment call of the provider. And the bottom line is if the individual is potentially harming themselves or someone else, then that's when action needs to be taken. I certainly sympathize with the calls to make Kendra's law more comprehensive and effective because we see it on our streets every day. We also see folks who are met by different social service providers every day of the week. We need to be consistent in our outreach. There's a woman who's middle-aged who is near where my husband and my family live. And we learned that one of the reasons she is fearful of the system is, one, the shelters are dangerous. She can't get a single bed. She's put into a group, which she's not confident in. Secondly, the individuals who come out to see her every day, it's a revolving door of personnel. We have to be more professional in confronting this crisis by having greater consistency in our healthcare providers. I'd like to see our mental health providers in our subways, in our parks, highly identified, wearing whether it's a brightly colored vest or some other indicator to the public, so the public knows that we are helping our fellow New Yorkers. Because as a New Yorker, I don't have a sense of that. And that is creating this sense of unease in our public spaces that needs to be addressed.
We have such an enormous failure in our city and our state and our country in terms of how we're treating people with mental illness. We're not. The failure it's a crisis of enormous proportions. So we have, starting with the deinstitutionalization of mentally ill back in the 70s, where Willowbrook was a very famous mental institution. It was horrible. It was where people. I actually, when I was in high school, I remember protesting Willowbrook because the conditions were so horrific. And so that led to deinstitutionalization. And we were supposed to have community centers. We were supposed to move people to get mental health and community-based treatment and not these big institutions. But the money was never committed to that. It never happened. And what we had was a failure of leadership and a continuing failure of leadership to provide the kind of resources that we really need to address a problem that has now become a crisis. So we've got mentally ill people living on the streets. Just coming here this evening, I would say 3 or 4 people yelled and screamed at me as I was walking down the street, and yelled and screamed at other pedestrians. Your question is really, what do we do about that? What do we as a civilized society do about that? And people do have, the deinstitutionalization was, driven by a firm belief that people should not be forced to accept treatment for mental illness. That's not something that we as a society want to do. And so I think it's a complicated question as we're in a new era of looking at people, and also the science has evolved tremendously in the last, and the medications have evolved. So when we deinstitutionalized, we didn't have as many functioning medications and good medications. So I think we need to have a comprehensive approach to mental illness that is current, that takes into account the current science, and that starts really looking at what is really the humane solution here for people. When I see somebody who is clearly mentally ill, eating dinner out of a garbage can, and in the cold, not wearing shoes, and they're yelling at people, I do not feel that they are living a good quality life. I feel like I'm failing as a human being by not having more, being able to help them more, having more compassion for where they are in their life. And I feel like we need, and that's a lot of what drove me to decide to run for public office, because I feel like we all need to step up and say, what else can we be doing? And I think we need to look at it differently. I think we need to say, these are our brothers and sisters, and we need to provide them with the help that they need to live a more functioning life. And if that means we gently move them carefully into treatment facilities with their permission, I'm all for that.
Good follow-up question, 30 seconds. Do you support state funding for mental health beds that provide 24-hour supervision for individuals?
Yes, I can't believe that's controversial.
It's not available.
Okay, yes, I certainly support it, yes.
Yes.
We're gonna move on to affordable housing. And we know that we spend a lot of time in supportive housing. We produce that, and our district has, we're in number 3 of 59 supportive housing. We welcome them and everyone agrees. However, in Hell's Kitchen, 1-bedroom apartments rent start at $3,200 a month. 2 bedrooms start at $1,500 a month. In other words, a single person needs to make $130,000 to afford a 1-bedroom and $230,000 for a family of 3. Moderate middle income housing individuals are priced out of Hell's Kitchen, not just the city, in this district here. To support affordable housing produced not only for low income households, which we produce great number of units every year, but also for moderate middle income. Maria first.
So I definitely support moderate income. I think the Mitchell Lama program was extremely successful, and I don't know why we abandoned it. I'd love us to go back to affordable housing for the middle class. I think we are not doing enough to increase housing for LGBTQ youth, artists, creators, people who come to the city, who want to work on Broadway. First responders, we would like our police officers and our firemen to live in the city, and they can take up less parking if we do that. We want to have, housing for them as well, and we're definitely not doing enough for that. I think Mayor Adams has added some, I think $6.7 million to help with support building more middle income or income to support, like say, LGBTQ youth. He's doing more of that. I think we need to do more of that. I have a friend whose daughter just bought her first apartment. She's in her mid-20s from a family that is, a single mother, low income, and she was able to get a state grant to help with the down payment. And the parents mother is thrilled with that. So I think we need to increase more home ownership opportunities for people, especially in the lower and middle income, because I think that's a path to building wealth for families. So these are all the things I really think New York needs to be the leader in the country on this kind of housing in our city. And the focus needs to be more on that. I think it's really important that we do it.
Right.
Yes, we need to build more and protect what we have. And I'm proud, and I haven't heard my colleagues speak about the rent stabilization laws and the efforts in Albany to both renew them and strengthen them. But I'm very proud of that fact because we need to keep New Yorkers in their homes now. So many of my constituents are living month to month. We need good cause eviction, Joe, because it's not just our folks, our friends who live in rent stabilized apartments. What about the people who live in market rate apartments whose rents this year during COVID have jumped 10, 15, 25% and more? What about them? We could pass legislation, which I co-sponsor in the Senate Judiciary Committee, which would cap that ability for a landlord to raise unconscionable levels of rent. That's so important. But of course, HK and this neighborhood have been models for getting new affordable housing, and we need all bands because that's what makes a vibrant neighborhood. That's what makes this neighborhood so special. And I really do support moderate and middle. Those are, that's the middle class of the future. Certainly families and folks who work in government and other public service should have an opportunity to live within this amazing neighborhood. I always feel like, I'm so jealous of my 2 daughters because they actually are growing up in New York City. I wish I would.
So 30 seconds each. What legislative changes would you propose in Albany to help foster moderate and housing rate?
Well, I think we abandoned the 421A program, and I think we should bring it back. I think we really need it. I also think in terms of just cause eviction, I think that in Minneapolis, St. Paul, for example, St. Paul passed such a law, and within a few months, the number of new buildings dropped by 80%, and they all moved to Minneapolis. So if we want to build more housing, we want to support the middle class. We certainly need to support tax incentives because it's expensive to build. New York is expensive, so if we want to encourage building, we have to have better laws.
421A, to everyone listening, was a complete giveaway to developers, billions of dollars, to the tune of $3 billion a year out of your pockets to developers who didn't need it. So we can build affordable without a giveaway tax program like 421A. And let me say something about good causation. New Jersey has had it for decades, and they have one of the strongest housing markets in the country. Good cause is a good idea because not everyone was lucky enough to snag a rent stabilized apartment, and people shouldn't be treated differently as a result.
Final question of this segment. Voters in this district want to know that our state senator can effectively work and advocate for our community's diverse needs. How will you be a community builder and form coalitions? Pass it to Brent.
Well, I think the proof is in my record. I think if you're going to run for public office, you can have a lot of great ideas, which is wonderful, but you also have to have a record and accomplishments, especially for an office as important as the Senate. And I think I've proven that over the last 9 years. And diversity is key because we have this amazing diverse population. It's often not reflected, though, in the halls of power. One of the things I'm most proud of is, as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, is making certain that we get diversity in our judges. I passed legislation that requires the Office of Court Administration to give us a report on diversity among the judicial branch. And that's an important indicator of how much work left we have to do. But coalition building is key. I mean, my first taste of it was when we defeated the West Side Stadium. That was my first taste. We have a coalition to shape the Penn Station redevelopment. It involves everyone from block associations to civic groups to social services organizations that I helped bring in to folks in business. You can't turn a blind eye to the business community. I understand that, and you have to work with it. We had a coalition to help reimagine our public housing here on the west side of Manhattan that Joe helped lead. That was a masterclass in building together, bringing together groups that were inherently in opposition to each other, like folks who represented tenants, and legal services, and tenants themselves, and developers. And over the course of years, it took, a plan was actually developed that everyone supported. No one got everything they wanted in that plan, but the tenants won, and I'm very proud of that effort because it showed that tenants can help direct a coalition that wider groups bring to the table.
So I do want to say that going back just for a moment to Just Cause in Minneapolis and St. Paul, it's really devastated the building of new housing.
Yeah.
Okay, so just wanted to answer
That's
this point about. Okay, sure. So in terms of building coalition, when I was in the private sector, I was tasked with building a coalition of people from all over the industries that we were in to work together to try to find solutions to the disruption that big tech was causing. And it was an impossible task, but I did it. It took 10 years, but we built a huge coalition that really helped to make it possible for the publishing industry to have a standing in a very, very disruptive environment. And I would say the work that I did in coalition building in those years saved many, probably thousands and thousands of jobs. So I'm very proud of that work. I think in terms of my local experience, I co-founded a group called One City Rising, which is made up of people from all over the 5 boroughs. We had people from Crown Heights, Brooklyn, Brownsville, and quite a few people from the Bronx and Queens. And we meet regularly. We talk about how to work together to bring about the kinds of change that we think New York desperately needs. So I think I have a lot of, I think what people would say about me in terms of my temperament is that I'm the kind of person who is an extremely good listener and works very hard to make sure that we are finding solutions that are going to work for a broad range of issues and people, and that doesn't alienate any particular group. I think many of us in New York City, and myself included, have gotten very involved because we felt left out, because we haven't had a seat at the table, because we feel our issues have not been addressed, that our concerns about crime, our concerns about mental illness that isn't getting addressed, accountability issues, we are shouting into the wind. And, you know, as I said, when I ran for city council last year, I was supported by probably 150 people from my community. We were known for the women's suffragette purple shirts, and we were walking all over the neighborhood canvassing. I think that's why I came in second place, because of so much community building and community involvement. And that's something that, you know, if I'm elected, what I want to do is make sure every corner of our District 47 is heard and represented. My campaign logo was "I hear you." So that's really important to me.
Thank you very much. We have some questions from the public, and they're really about the same thing. Basically, how can we ensure that the state is holding social service providers accountable? Are they audited? And what specific legislation do you think of, do you propose to hold the providers accountable? Sorry, Brad.
Well, you know, we have to also make sure that our city partners do their job. Home services is largely a city domain. Certainly the state can provide hearings to oversee that, but I'll tell you, you know, the city council has its work cut out for it as well. We certainly need to make sure that this mayor and all mayors live up to their campaign promises of building more affordable. I would go back to the legislation that I'm drafting now on private providers, and I would look to bifurcate the for-profit from the not-for-profit. I don't think a for-profit housing entity should be able to operate a nonprofit shell housing entity. I think that should be forbidden, and I'm exploring that. The third thing I would say is funding should come with requirements, and you know, we have a $220 billion budget in the state of New York. We would be, I think, the 10th largest economy in the world if we were viewed as a single country. If we're going to fork over money to the city, we should have data collection requirements. We should have requirements that the providers appear before our budget committees, and we should ensure that if they don't, we subpoena them and get the answers we need.
Thank you. Maria?
So good government changes are really needed to raise the level of accountability in our service providers. And one of the things we need to pass at the state level is a more comprehensive ethics law. So we need an ethics and conflicts of interest law. Beginning, I mentioned these op-eds. I wrote one about this, just got published in the Novelist a couple of days ago, and it talks about how we really need to reform our conflicts law so that people who are working in government can't also have conflicts that make it not in their best interest to hold service providers and others accountable. So that's one easy fix, low-hanging fruit fix. We need a much better conflicts law. We really need to hold our elected leaders' feet to the fire on this. And we need to pass these laws in a way that it's done independently from the people who are going to be subject to these accountability oversight. So we want to have separate people appointed, maybe judges, law school professors, others who might who can write a complex law that is really going to have teeth in it. So that's something we can do. And I am definitely open to the idea of looking at what the state can do when we have what is clearly a complex situation that isn't getting addressed at the city level, that the state needs to step in, and we can pass laws that will do that, because I think this is not sustainable to spend this kind of money and not know that there are that our representatives, our controllers at the city and state level are doing their jobs.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to provide you with 4 minutes for closing remarks. Start with Senator Hoylman.
Well, thank you very much, Travis, Joe, Pastor, and everyone watching, State Senator Brad Hoylman. It's been a pleasure to be here with my colleague. I most certainly agree that we have a work cut out for us as New Yorker, but I'm optimistic about the future because we have seen since the change in leadership in the state Senate, a body formerly controlled by the Senate Republicans for the better part of 100 years, pivot toward addressing the needs of our local communities. Whether it's passing the strongest rent laws in the nation, fighting to ensure that kids get the vaccines so they can stay healthy and protect their teachers, building new infrastructure, doing it responsibly with transparency and demanding that the community gets what it needs, and focusing on the issue of public safety, which obviously is a great concern to all New Yorkers, but a lot of West Siders who I hope to represent in the future. I'll say something that hasn't been mentioned tonight, but our public education system is key to that. I support fully funding our public schools. My opponent has said she supports charter schools, but we demand that whether it's charter schools or public schools, that they have the transparency and accountability that we're demanding of all providers of services to the public. I have legislation that I hope to move next session to do just that. And our infrastructure includes not just our mass transit system, which I've mentioned numerous times tonight, but also our arts and culture. We are blessed with so many public spaces here on the west side of Manhattan, whether it's Hudson River Park, Riverside Park, the High Line, or others, including Central Park, which I hope to represent too. We need to make sure that those public spaces are funded and have the programming responsive to our communities and are safe places that communities can rely on. At the end of the day, New York is a vibrant, exciting place to live. We have to keep it that way because we need to continue to attract the youth. We need to continue to attract business. We need to make sure that people have the opportunities they want to live here and grow old gracefully, and that our state and city government are responsive to those needs. Public safety is key. That's why I'm so proud that in the negotiations, when Albany went back into session to address the right-wing Supreme Court's decision, not just on abortion, but also on guns, I fought to have Times Square deemed the only geographic area in the state of New York that will be declared a gun-free zone. And let me just mention on abortion rights, we are a beacon of hope and freedom for all Americans who in those 50 states where abortion has been banned, that we can welcome them to New York and not face reprisals. And that includes our LGBTQ community and our transgender youth and their parents. It is an honor to serve this district for the last 9 years. I look forward to doing so should I have your vote this week all the way through August 23rd. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
Perfect time. Go ahead.
Okay, so I want to thank you for hosting us this evening. It's
In person.
honor to be here and very good to be in person. I am in agreement with my colleague that I have hope for New York, but we need change. We really do. And we're on the wrong path. And I think
there's a recent poll that 56% of New Yorkers think we're going in the wrong direction. We lost $19.5 million in revenues in 2021. State. We lost more people and more tax revenue than any other state in the country. Crime is a big problem. I did mention about the subway, but I agree with Senator Hoylman that we really do need to address safety in the subway. It's the lifeblood of New York, it's the backbone of the city. We have to do more, but there's opposition to having the kind of public safety that we need in the subway system. There's been opposition from our leadership. There's been opposition in our schools to having safety agents in our schools. I think the idea that leadership in Albany has enacted laws that promote public safety is a lot of smoke and mirrors. I don't think we've done that. I think going up to Albany and that special section, they did a lot on guns, they did a lot on rifles, but I'm not seeing that rifles is a big problem here in New York. In Hawaii, for example, they have really aggressive pistol laws. We could have done much, much more. We didn't do it. One lost opportunity after another. And to say that the laws that have been enacted by the Working Families Party, ideological, far left leadership in Albany are not responsible for the mess that we're in, I think is extremely disingenuous. And I think we need change. We need to get back on path. I say to people all the time, it's like we're in an upside down world and we have to get right side up. We're not going to do that if people don't get out and vote. We have another problem here, which is voter engagement. We have, I don't want to go through the statistics, but it's an extremely small number of people who are electing our leaders, and they are not speaking for all the people in District 47. So I'm going to make a plea that if you like what you heard this evening, regardless of who you want to vote for, please go out and vote, engage, get involved. I think that I just want to address education because I think it's a really important point. Less than 14% of Black children are reading, writing, and doing math at grade level when they finish 8th grade. And it makes me furious that more people are not standing out on the corner screaming about this when they're running for public office. This is not sustainable. So I support public schools, but we are in a crisis. We cannot have another generation of kids who aren't going to be getting good jobs because people are supported by the UFT and other special interest groups that don't want to address the failing of our public school system in New York City right here, right now, today. So yes, I think we do, I do support public education. Our charter schools are public schools, but we need solutions today that is going to get kids educated so that they can have good jobs, they can participate in our economy, and they can have home ownership opportunities, and they can be successful. So yes, I am supporting the need, and this is from my One City Rising, talking to people in the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens. They are desperate for school options. They're not getting it. The kids have fallen behind by average of 7 months. I fought during the pandemic. I fought to get those schools opened. I went to many rallies and did a lot of speaking about it. We need to do more. We need to address the delays that the kids have suffered. And we're not going to do that if it's business as usual in Albany. We need new leadership. We need new faces. We need new perspectives. We need new, fresh ideas. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you both very much for coming tonight and sitting in our well-attended virtually, like virtual, which we don't have the staff, so we check it. But and in a very warm room. Thank you, Pastor Strasser. Very important for having us here. Thank you all the public staff for this very important discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.